Welcome to Native and Invasive Species Explained. Today we're going to just be going through some definitions on native and invasive species and a couple things about weeds. So first, native plants. Native plants are a plant that is part of an ecosystem of an area and has developed over hundreds or thousands of years in that particular region or ecosystem. Generally, this needs to have a geographic qualifier, as in native to New England, or native to the Americas, native to Mexico, things like that. Plants found in the United States before European settlements are the only ones that are considered to be native to the United States. Anything after will be native to Europe. One example of that would be cosmos. We have cosmos currently on the seed cart here in the Faulkner County Library. Cosmos are native to Mexico because they were found here, in Mexico, before settlers, the European settlement, came to America. Non-native plants are plants that are introduced with human help, whether that be intentionally or accidentally, to a new place or new type of habitat where it was not previously found. For example, cosmos, they're native to Mexico, but they're non-native to high eastern plains of South Africa because they were introduced there via contaminated horse feed during the Anglo-Boer War. And I probably mispronounced that war name. Some types of non-native species would be invasive and exotic. Invasive non-natives were moved by people, and they're harmful to humans and the environment. Generally, they're out of control, and there are sometimes government or organizations that are trying to get them under control. For example, we have boa constrictors in Florida. They were introduced either as exotic pets or just people thought they would be fun to release them, and they have gotten out of control. There are non-native species that thrive in that environment. They don't have really any natural predators, and they are currently eating a lot of native species and destroying habitat. Those would be considered invasive. Exotic non-native species were moved by people, but they're not harmful. They really have no effect on native species. Generally, they're a little bit more high maintenance because they're not quite adapted to that specific area. For example, orchids or Venus flytraps. Those are not native species to most likely our offices where we would have them. And they're higher maintenance, but they're not going to be, if you plant them outside, they're not going to overtake the yard, and they're not going to destroy native species or things like that. Species are generally moved by people because it was intentional. We have a lot of species that were brought over because they were ornamental. Things, even animals. So things like pheasants. Pheasants are not native to North America. They are an Asian bird. But they were brought over because they were pretty and people like to hunt them. That would be introduction. They're completely new to an area, and they would be considered non-native. Reintroduction are species that were once indigenous, but now are no longer found there. The introduction of those species would be considered native. So that would be if in the previous slide we had cosmos that were native to Mexico. If all the cosmos in Mexico were wiped out and we replanted some in Mexico, they would still be considered native, but they're no longer found there because they have been wiped out. Restocking is essentially another version of that, where they haven't been wiped out, but their levels are reaching a critical low, and we're trying to increase that population. I've got a little poorly drawn map here for you guys. The green on the right-hand side would be an area where plant A would be native, so it would be native to the European area. If we moved it translocation to North America, where we have the purple dots, that would be an area where it would be non-native. However, in the blue, that would be an area where it's non-native, but it is now actively harming native species and wildlife. So something can be non-native without being invasive. So how do invasive species take over? Generally, it's because they produce large quantities of seed that are distributed by birds, wind, or by humans, letting them spread quickly and pretty thoroughly. They thrive on disturbed soil, which could mean tilled soil on farms, it could mean construction sites, and it generally could mean just wherever that soil has been upturned and they can get down into the dirt. They generally have aggressive and dense root systems. They'll spread really long distances from just a single plant, and if that plant is destroyed, they'll be able to pop back up from another portion of that root. The density really hurts other surrounding vegetation because it will compete for nutrients, it will compete for sunlight, it will compete for space. And when you have a really dense root system, that can overtake, surround, and smother other plants. Some even produce chemicals in their leaves and root systems that will inhibit the growth of surrounding plants. We actually kind of see this already with evergreens, where if you look outside underneath a evergreen, the bottom portion of it will not have things growing underneath there when there's a dense layer of the thorns or the green, I'm forgetting the term for it, the pine needles. If there's a dense layer of pine needles underneath that evergreen, there's not going to be a lot of things growing underneath it because it's generally very, very acidic, and only things that can thrive in acidic soil will grow there. So, invasive species have contributed to the decline of 42% of U.S. endangered and threatened species, and 18% of U.S. endangered species invasives are the main cause of the decline. They compete directly with native species for moisture, sunlight, nutrients, and space. When they compete directly and they take over, one singular invasive species can overtake 10, 20, 30 different types of native species. When you have a decrease in plant diversity, that can negatively impact soil quality, which causes more erosion, which will decrease water quality and therefore recreational opportunities. So this does actively affect even someone who is not a gardener. These impacts change nature's balance, which all of us depend on. You may have heard people refer to dandelions as not a weed or a weed, and the great debate about that. So the term weed is actually based on the perceived value of the plant in that specific situation. For example, if you are growing a homogeneous grassy lawn and a weed for example, a dandelion pops up, that dandelion is something that is not wanted because you want a homogeneous grassy lawn. Therefore, it is considered a weed. However, if you are growing dandelions as a crop and a tomato plant pops up, or anything else, whatever else pops up is considered the weed, even if it's a tomato plant. It is whatever you don't want in that specific area. Noxious weeds are actually designated by an agricultural or other governing authority as a plant that would harm agricultural, horticultural crops, natural habitats or ecosystems, or humans or livestock. This doesn't mean that noxious weeds are non-native. Some of them are native, and some of them are actually beneficial to wildlife populations. The designation noxious weed just means that it would harm a specific agricultural or horticultural crop. It would just harm something. It doesn't mean that it's not beneficial in another circumstance. Here are some of the references we have. We also have this PowerPoint listed on our Facebook page. And other in-house and online library references. The first one, Controlling the Invasive Species by Liz Chung, is actually a physical copy in the library, and the other three are going to be our ebooks on Hoopla. Feel free to ask the front desk at the Faulkner County Library for further assistance on finding these books. Thank you, and have a great day.